All right, we will go ahead and get started. We are in person and virtual, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for Science Friday. My name is Jennifer. I'm the education coordinator here at Oldham Creek. We have Science Friday the first Friday of every month, spring through October. And for May and for June, we will be talking lake fish, but different species. So today we're going to focus on Lake Sturgeon. The manager of Oldham Creek is here, Janice Kearns, and she's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you. And if you are in person, please enjoy refreshments from the Friends of Oldham Creek. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am super excited about our guest speaker today, Eric Weimer. He is the fisheries supervisor for the Sandusky Research Office here on Lake Erie. He oversees the western basin of Lake Erie. He's highly involved in a variety of different management of different kinds of species on Lake Erie, including walleye, perch, and various other ones. He also helps out extensively within the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission, Lake Erie committees, and probably lots of different hats there, including a lot of work on grass carp. So he is a wealth of knowledge of all fisheries related questions within the Western Basin, as well as Lake Erie as a whole. He works a lot across multiple partnerships on this side of the lake and the other side with our Canadian partners. And he has been with the ODNR for the last 20 years, and specifically in the Sandusky Wildlife Office. So he has a wealth of experience and is going to talk to you about some new work that the Division of Wildlife is doing on the Cuyahoga River. As the Cuyahoga River has greatly improved over our lifetimes and more, they're going to be introducing Lake Sturgeon to the river, and Eric is going to tell us a bit about that. So I'll leave it to you, Eric.
I'm going to dim these lights up.
Sounds good. Thank you, Janice. Hope you didn't oversell this too much. So, yeah, right. There we go. No, I appreciate it, and I'm going to pull up my notes here. Okay. So, yeah, like Janice said, our office has been involved in a couple of different efforts to reintroduce Lake Sturgeon into Lake Erie and in some specific tributaries to the lake. And so I'm going to talk today a little bit about how kind of a multi-agency, multi-partner group has been using kind of a deliberate and science-driven approach to reintroducing this valuable native species, and how while we're focusing on a specific river, there are benefits to the Great Lakes, Lake Erie in particular, with that. So let me move to the next slide. So as part of that, this presentation, I'm going to use the word "we" an awful lot. And it's because, with efforts like this, these things can't be done in a vacuum. We have to utilize large partnerships in order to kind of address these large scale challenges. There are these types of projects are sensitive both ecologically and politically. They can't be done in a vacuum. It's not one agency that's just going to make these decisions. And we each have unique roles to play here. Some of us have the statutory authority over reintroducing a species into the lake. Some agencies are subject matter experts. Some are public land holders, managers, communications, and others are engaged as stakeholders. But what we found is that these shared interests lead to successful projects through sharing resources as well. So I'm going to use the word "we" an awful lot, and it's not referring to the Division of Wildlife. It's referring to this large partnership that's involved here. And I also want to maybe take a larger step back and talk just briefly about native species restoration in general, but particularly in the Great Lakes. We don't do restoration or reintroduction activities like we do a put, grow, and take fishery in a pond. We're not interested in a one-time stocking and let's see what happens. This type of work should really be done with the goal of having self-sustaining populations as the result. And so we look at native species reintroduction efforts as long-term investments, especially for a species like Lake Sturgeon, which are very long-lived, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes. And that requires an investment on the partner's behalf. So we have to invest in infrastructure in order to collect, rear, and stock these fish, which infrastructure requires funding. So we have to have the appropriate funding dedicated to this type of work. And long-term, because we have the goal of starting a stocking program is to end stocking at some point and having a self-sustaining population, we need to approach these with a scientific approach that gives us the best likelihood of success. So there's a lot of investment into these projects before fish even hit the water in order to determine whether we have a good chance of success with these reintroduction efforts. So in my talk today, I want to kind of follow a real broad outline, and I'm going to start with real basic biology about what lake sturgeon are, where they live, and what the challenges to this reintroduction project have been based on their biology. There are some real challenges with lake sturgeon in general. And then I want to talk a little bit about why we're targeting the Cuyahoga River. And I will probably switch back and forth between calling it the Cuyahoga and the Cuyahoga. If you're a local to Cleveland, you'll expect me to say it one way, but I'm not local, so I'm just going to say it however it rolls off the tongue. And then I want to talk about the actual process that we, our partners and the division are using to address knowns and unknowns about lake sturgeon and these reintroduction efforts, and then talk about kind of what our next steps are going to be in this process. And I hope to end up with discussing or sharing with you some real early pilot project work that we've done. We started last fall. That's going to be informative to this reintroduction process. So let's first start by talking about lake sturgeon in general. So lake sturgeon are a large native to the Great Lakes species. By large, they commonly exceed 5 feet in length if they're allowed to live long enough, and can easily weigh over 100 pounds as adults. Like I mentioned, they are long-lived, often exceeding 100 years in age, but they're also a primitive fish. So they are not a bony fish like most of our fish in the Great Lakes are. They have mostly, their skeleton is mostly made up of cartilage. Think of it the same way as you would maybe a shark, in that they have a cartilaginous skeleton. But lake sturgeon also have what we call scutes. They're bony scutes instead of scales. So they're these bony, almost armored plate-like large scales almost on their body, but they're not scales like we think of it as a normal bony fish. So they're bottom oriented. They actually, if you look and see, I got to turn the laser pointer back on. Here we go. If you look at the pictures here, you'll see these fibers hanging off. Now these are called barbels. They are not just to make them look handsome, like all of us who have facial hair know. they actually are sensory organs that help them detect prey in the substrate. So these large fish will orient to the bottom, looking for invertebrates, and frankly, right now they feed almost entirely on round gobies a lot of the time. The one benefit to an invasive species. They are oriented, and they don't have a mouth like you would normally expect. Their mouth is almost funnel shaped or suction hose shaped, that they can extend and suck their prey up off of the bottom. Small fish, mussels, and invertebrates are typically what they eat. They are very slow to mature. So it usually, we plan on 15 to 20 years before female lake sturgeon becomes sexually reproductive. And males are usually in the 8 to 15 year range. So it makes them especially sensitive to disruptions to their populations. If there's an event or an issue that kills or has an impact on the sturgeon population, because they are so slow to mature, it can have really long-lasting effect, and it makes them especially sensitive to things like alteration of habitat and overharvest. I did put one of the pictures here, is of a rather large specimen that was caught a few years ago out of the Detroit River by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 240 pounds and 7 feet in length. A massive mature female that is really towards the top end of their growth and their size. So lake sturgeon are one of 9 species of sturgeon in North America, and one of 2 that are here in Ohio. Lake sturgeon are the large blue area here is their distribution or historic distribution, and you can see that it ranges throughout the Great Lakes, really from the St. Lawrence River through the Great Lakes to the upper Mississippi River and north up to Hudson Bay. So this is the area that they are native to. They do well in both lakes and in rivers, and so they are found in both in good numbers, and often utilized both during their same lifespan. And we know that the core of this range, the Great Lakes, has been significantly altered ever since human settlement began. So there have been impacts to lake sturgeon populations in the Great Lakes due to habitat loss, which includes like dredging activities that have disrupted spawning areas. You can see the pictures here on the left are a before and after of the Trenton Channel or the Livingston Channel in the Detroit River. When they dewatered it in order to deepen it for Great Lakes shipping traffic, we went from this great looking rough cobble substrate, which is great spawning habitat for a variety of species, and we blasted down through that and ruined a lot of that habitat. So that's an example of a habitat impact that has directly influenced sturgeon populations. Dam construction has been another one. There are stocks of lake sturgeon that historically, while they might live out in the Great Lakes, they would run up into tributaries in order to spawn. And these dams cut them off from their historic spawning grounds. So there are several examples around the Great Lakes of that happening. Water quality is always a challenge, and we know some of the history of Lake Erie, especially with water quality, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And overharvest has been an issue historically, and not necessarily the way that you think, because initial harvest of lake sturgeon was because of them being a nuisance. They would get into nets and destroy the netting. And so they were removed and piled up on beaches and even set on fire and burned that way. It was eventually found that their eggs made great caviar, but they were also used for things like isinglass historically. So currently, after all of this, currently Lake Sturgeon are a state listed endangered species in Ohio. So the state has listed them as endangered. They're not federally listed. So looking at Lake Erie in specifically, there historically were 19 different spawning locations around Lake Erie, extending upstream into the St. Clair River between Michigan and Ontario, and down to the Upper Niagara River down in Buffalo. In Ohio, we had 5 documented spawning locations for Lake Sturgeon. The Maumee River, the Portage River, the Sandusky River, and the Cuyahoga River, plus a main lake offshore reef near Conneaut are all places where these fish historically would spawn in Lake Erie. Currently, we have 2 spawning populations that kind of bookend Lake Erie. There's a large spawning population to the east in Buffalo Harbor and the Upper Niagara River. That population is estimated to be around 900 adults in that population. But the real large population in the Great Lakes is in the St. Clair River, Lake St. Clair, and Detroit River area, where there's an estimated 20 to 30,000 adult lake sturgeon that are using that area and spawning successfully up there. And we would think that with especially that large population to the north of Lake Erie, and the fact that we know lake sturgeon adults swim through Lake Erie all the time, we would think that they would recolonize some of these historic spawning locations. But there is actually no evidence that suggests that they're able to do that. A fish will occasionally be found by an angler up in one of the tributaries, but it's certainly not enough to reestablish spawning populations on their own. And so that's kind of where we step in. The Lake Erie Committee has a specific objective as part of their fish community goal objectives for Lake Erie. And if you're not familiar, the Lake Erie Committee, it's an interagency fisheries management collaborative between the 4 states in the U.S. that share a piece of Lake Erie and the province of Ontario. It's all coordinated through the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. And their objective for Lake Sturgeon is, as you can read, is to preserve both the current remaining spawning stocks, but also to establish a new adult spawning location, at least in one location in Lake Erie or in its tributaries. So there's been some work that's been done to address this indicator. And you might have heard some of the efforts that we've been doing in the Maumee River. So Lake Sturgeon reintroduction on Lake Erie began, the actual stocking began in 2018 in the Maumee River. Annual stocking has been going on since then. While the work began in the late 2000s, fish actually hit the water in 2018. There are 3,000 lake sturgeon juveniles that are stocked in the Maumee River annually. It's a collaborative between the Division of Wildlife, the Toledo Zoo, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And one of the neat things is, half of the fish that we stock are raised at the Toledo Zoo using Maumee River water, hoping that those fish will imprint on the Maumee and be more likely to come back when they mature and are come back to spawn. And it gives us, because of that, an opportunity to have a big public event every fall. It's usually the first or second weekend of October that the zoo hosts a Sturgeon Fest, is what they call it. And the public has an opportunity to come and actually release a lake sturgeon themselves, which is a really neat opportunity that you don't get at just anywhere around the Great Lakes. And typically we have around 1,000 people that show up for that each year. And it's actually gotten larger as time's gone on. So with these efforts beginning, have we seen any impact on populations out in the lake? And there are several indicators that show that, yeah, there have been some improvements in at least the number of lake sturgeon that we're seeing out in Lake Erie. This figure is incidental catches of lake sturgeon in trap nets. And where before we started stocking in the Maumee River, we might see up to 5 or 6 lake sturgeon in a year get caught and released from trap nets. You can see that number has increased in the years since stocking started. And last year it was pushing 35 or 36 fish that were caught and released. Many of them we can tie directly back to the Maumee River stocking. Each fish that gets stocked has a pit tag. If you have a pet that you've ever microchipped, it's the same thing. And so we can scan, or the commercial fishermen that we work with will scan those fish when they catch them, and they can give us the number. We can tell when and where that fish was stocked. So it's been very successful with using multiple different measures, the Maumee project has. And so with that level of success, of course, we start looking around and wondering, well, where else could we do this? And so that takes us to the next step in our outline. Why the Cuyahoga River? For you that maybe aren't as familiar with the Cuyahoga, it's a horseshoe-shaped river, northeast Ohio, that's approximately 160 kilometers long. About 70 kilometers or so of that river is free flowing at this time. Right now, the Gorge Dam down near Akron, or Cuyahoga Falls, is what is blocking upstream movement of fish, although there's not it was likely a fairly significant barrier there naturally before they built the dam. So yeah, right now there are 72 kilometers that are currently free flowing to Lake Erie. And what's neat is that there's about 107 million or 1.7 million people that live in the Cuyahoga River watershed. And that's about 15% of the Ohio population. So between the city of Cleveland and the city of Akron and all of the suburbs around that, there are a lot of people that are in this watershed. So it's not always had a pretty history, the Cuyahoga River. In fact, you could call it a very ugly history at one point. Pollution and other industrial impacts on especially the lower Cuyahoga River have really impacted the water quality there over time. And it's most famous for the series of fires that happened in Cleveland, the last of which was in 1969, I believe. That's the one that got the most attention nationally. And so that was kind of like the darkest hour of the Cuyahoga River. But that fire was also what led to some really sweeping changes nationally with the way that we do environmental policy. So in 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was formed. 1972, the Clean Water Act was signed, which is an amazing piece of legislation that has led to the recovery of Lake Erie and a lot of fish populations here. And then by 1987, the Cuyahoga River was designated as an area of concern, which focused money and attention on addressing a lot of beneficial use impairments. The nice thing is that currently 5 of those 9 beneficial use impairments have been lifted or removed. And the river is now arguably cleaner than it was in any time in the last 150 years. So, it's this recovery is what makes us as a sturgeon partnership interested in the Cuyahoga River and looking at what might be possible there. Historically, there were Lake Sturgeon that utilized the Cuyahoga River, as I mentioned before. And this is documented both in the scientific, but also the general public literature at the time. And so we were looking at the Cuyahoga River simply because it makes the most sense in our step of addressing where we might begin efforts to reestablish a spawning population. So the next part of this, we're going to talk about the actual process that the division and our partners use to decide whether we're moving forward with a reintroduction or not. So this figure, this flow chart represents the various steps along the way of determining whether we're going to move forward with reintroduction efforts in any given location. And this process was developed through a lot of the work that we did with the Maumee River, identifying what steps, what boxes we needed to check before we could move forward there. And it has been further refined by what we're doing on the Cuyahoga. But we also use this process with other species as well. This is not just a Lake Sturgeon reintroduction process, but it's a native species reintroduction process. And it really has several different steps to it. The first one I just talked about, identifying whether there's an existing or was historically an existing population of sturgeon at a location. The next one is to identify and address conditions that might constrain success of a reintroduction effort. That is a big one. That one takes a lot of time and effort to check that box. After that, we assemble and have the Lake Erie Committee approve a formal reintroduction plan that would outline the process, the strategies, and the expectations between partners if we move forward with reintroduction. We then move to the collection of gametes, eggs and milt from Lake Sturgeon, and determining where we're getting those from, how many, and where they're going to be reared at, and where we're going to stock these fish at. And then we get down to the last step, which is fish in the water and evaluating the success of the project. And that's a evaluation and reevaluation that then feeds back into our stocking strategies. And at some point during this process, you have to mention that we begin outreach with the public. And if all things go well, that includes stocking events and large scale public outreach is really a fun part of these projects. So we've established that there was an existing spawning population in the Cuyahoga River. And there's been a lot of work that's been done in other parts of the Great Lakes, including the Maumee River, but in other places that have kind of given us a head start on some of the addressing and identifying constraints. So there are some things that are knowns moving into this project. So previous research has provided some knowns that we can apply to the Cuyahoga. There is a document that was published back in 2010 that talks about strategies and especially like the genetic requirements for stocking Lake Sturgeon in the Great Lakes. And that work has provided a lot of important baseline information for us. So it's through that we have a minimum population size that we're going to target. So a minimum, the lowest, smallest population that is considered self-sustaining in the Great Lakes is 750 adults. So that is automatically our target for a minimum population size. There's been some work done by Jordan McKenna at the University of Toledo that estimated that the survival of juvenile lake sturgeon stocked into the Maumee River is between 19 and almost 70% survival, which is really good. Most of the survival is well above, right in the 50% range, depending on which estimates they use. So survival there has been great. Once those fish hit the water, there's not a lot of predation and not a lot of mortality. So knowing that we have a minimum goal of 750 fish, and we have an estimate for juvenile survival, it tells us that if we stock 1,500 juveniles into the Cuyahoga River for the next 25 years, that we theoretically can hit that 750 adult goal, the population target. We also know from the work done by Welsh et al. That the St. Clair River, which has a large sturgeon population, is a genetic match to Lake Sturgeon that historically used the Lake Erie and other places. We know that they're a genetic match to the fish that are down in the upper Niagara. And so that's a great source population for us to use because there's lots of adults, which means a high chance of collecting the gametes that we need. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a hatchery in Wisconsin at Genoa that is dedicated to raising Lake Sturgeon, among other things. They are really good at raising a lot of Lake Sturgeon for us. And so we know that we can rely on them as a partner to rear fish for us for stocking. And we also know that if we can get those fish to approximately 180 millimeters long, which is right around 7 inches, that survival at stocking is 80% or higher. So we have a target number of fish, and now we have a target size, and we know where we can get these from. So these are some of the important knowns that have been addressed kind of by others that we can apply to the Cuyahoga River. But that doesn't answer everything. There's always unknowns. And for us, the unknowns really fall into two categories. Is the habitat that's available in the Cuyahoga River suitable for Lake Sturgeon, not only spawning, but for juvenile survival until they outmigrate into the lake? And also, where are the best places for us to target stocking at? Are there different places in the river that provide a benefit to both survival, imprinting on the river water so that we get them to return, river retention, and then also thinking of it from a public outreach perspective, are there places where we have good access to the river that we can host events? So we have worked as a partnership to address quite a few of these concerns up prior to today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done there. So I want to introduce a concept called a habitat suitability index. It's a model that looks at a species requirements and typically with fish, we're looking at spawning requirements or survival. So what habitat fits best with what they need? And that can take on a range of different things. So for example, With lake sturgeon, there are three elements of habitat that we really need to meet before we can move forward with stocking. One is the right substrate has to be in the river. They have, as adults that are spawning, they want good cobble to gravel size substrate that they can broadcast their eggs on that allows sufficient oxygen to flow through the eggs so they don't suffocate and die, and you get good hatching. Water depth is also key. There's a range of about a meter to a couple of meters of water depth that is ideal for lake sturgeon spawning. And then water velocity or discharge is another pretty key thing. You can't have too much discharge because it might blow the eggs out of the system. Too little doesn't provide enough oxygen. There's a sweet spot there. And what a habitat suitability index model does is it stacks those, those good preferred ranges on each other and allows us to look spatially at a river or a lake and determine how much good adult lake sturgeon spawning habitat or juvenile rearing habitat is available in a given lake. This process was really fleshed out prior to us starting this work, and a lot of work here has been done in the Maumee River by Jessica Collier, who was a PhD student at the University of Toledo. She developed a model, and it got tweaked a little bit for the Cuyahoga River work that we're doing. And so in order to answer these questions, we have to collect field data. And this was done really by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Cuyahoga Valley National Park really spearheaded this work. Jason Fisher is the Fish and Wildlife Service employee that really took this project under his wing. A lot of field work and a lot of analyses went into this type of work. So really addressing these took two different efforts. First was the substrate classification. And with that, they used a combination of side scan sonar and then using some remote sensing imagery, satellite imagery, to look at the substrates in each of those each of the rivers. And that process kind of looks like this. So side scan gives you an image of what the bottom of the river looks like. And these are not fancy. These are the same kind of side scans that you could buy for your fishing boat for, $1,000. So, but it records those images. They mounted these to kayaks, and they basically paddled the nearly 72 kilometers of the river that was free flowing, collecting data where they could. And what you'll see is you get these patches of substrate that look different. When you get it back to the lab and you download the data, you've got some patches that look really rough. You've got others that are like wavy. You've got some that are just kind of smooth. And after you identify or break those up into different classifications, then you go back to the river and you go in and you wade in and you look and see what's there. And you can then accurately label all of these different substrate classifications. So some of the rougher stuff is clearly like boulder and cobble in these areas. More cobble down here was more of the wavy stuff. There's probably lots of sand in locations there where the finer sediments settle out, and some are even like more in the pebble range. And that allows us to get essentially we have substrate information for the entire 72-kilometer stretch of the lower Cuyahoga River. That was a big undertaking that took a couple of years of work to get all of this done and organized and analyzed. The next step is looking at bathymetry and discharge. That was a different process. In the field, there were transects that were run using an acoustic Doppler current profiler, which essentially is another type of sonar that can map flows vertically in the water column. Some places the water in the water column flows faster than others, and it really gets us, a good look at not only discharge where it needs to be, but also the bed elevation, so depth. And they took those readings at different cross sections. You can see on this map, it's maybe a little hard to see from the back, but these white lines across the Cuyahoga River are all places where they ran this current profiler across. They then took all of that current and that depth information, and they modeled that for different discharge rates. So obviously in the spring when fish are spawning, you can have high water, you can have low water, and sometimes a good mix of both. And not only does that change the flow, like the discharge rate, how fast the water is going through it, but it also expands and it changes the depth above certain substrates, or what might be high and dry under low water is now suddenly available to Lake Sturgeon to consider for spawning. And so Jason modeled these at 25, 50, and 75% of like peak spring discharge to get a good idea of what, this habitat suitability for Lake Sturgeon at each of these different discharge rates. So this is what the end result looks like from a mapping standpoint. And I know it gets a little blurry here when I tried to zoom in on it, but essentially we get a map that breaks habitat suitability down into three categories. You've got poor habitat, you've got moderate or habitat, and you've got good habitat. The good habitat is shown in the green, moderate in yellow, and the blue, if it shows up, I don't think there's any on this page, is poor habitat for Lake Sturgeon. And they do that for both the adult spawning and the juvenile survival. So Jason produced two different sets of data for that. So over here is the amount of juvenile habitat that is available this is juvenile survival habitat. They need a little bit softer sediments because they're digging around for prey, but they need places where they can hide from predators. And obviously you can see that the vast majority, even at the different discharge rates, is either good quality habitat or moderate habitat. There's very little poor habitat in the Cuyahoga River for juvenile sturgeon. When you look at spawning habitats for adults, there is more poor quality habitat. Like bedrock is no good for spawning, and there's lots of extensive areas. Silt is no good for spawning. So there's a lot of areas in the river that are poor. But if you look at this line here, this black line is our population goal of 750 adults. And we can see that even at the highest discharge rate, we have more than enough good quality habitat available in the lower Cuyahoga River to support 750 spawning adults. And if you look at the other discharge rates, you just see that amount going up. So very encouraging for us that we have what we think is ample habitat for both adult sturgeon spawners and for juveniles. So in a nutshell, we've got ample spawning habitat. A lot of it is upstream, up above the national park even, because there's a lot of bedrock in the national park, but upstream there's great spawning habitat. There's abundant nursery habitat for the juveniles, which is nice. It's downstream, which is where the current would take a larval sturgeon once it hatches. Both spawning and nursery habitat are well distributed. It's not like it's all in one location. It's very evenly distributed throughout the lower Cuyahoga River, and we have a surplus habitat for our ultimate population goal. So that's super exciting for us, and kind of checks that next box for that we needed to check for identifying these constraints. So yeah, that was really the most pressing concern that we had. And I mentioned stocking locations, and I'm going to come back to that later in this because we're currently doing some work to look at that to inform where we might put these fish. So looking back, our next step is the reintroduction plan. So because this is a large partnership and we would like to be collaborative in nature, we sought to have the Lake Erie Committee approve our reintroduction plan. That was done last spring at this time. If you're interested in looking at it and reading it, it's available on the Division of Wildlife website on our Lake Sturgeon page. I've got a link later on that you can or a QR code you can use if you want to. And ultimately, the reintroduction plan states that we're going to begin stocking Lake Sturgeon in the Cuyahoga River this fall of 2025. So collecting and rearing is kind of the next issue. And I'm just going to tell you what we're going to do because this has already been determined. So like I mentioned before, the St. Clair River population is a genetic match, and there are ample adults there that we can get gametes from. It's where we're getting our gametes for the Maumee River restoration work right now. And so those fish will be collected. It's typically very late May, early June that those fish are spawning. The Fish and Wildlife Service will go up there and they will use set lines to collect. The goal is 42 adults, and we want 7 females and 35 males. And that ratio of males to females will help us ensure that we have a good genetic diversity in the fish that we're stocking into the Cuyahoga River and the Maumee River. So they collect those in June, hold them in tanks for a couple of days until they're ready to spawn. They will fertilize the eggs right there on the side of the river, and they'll be transported to the Genoa Fish and Wildlife Service hatchery to be reared for the summer. And they will rear them until they're approximately 7 inches long, which is usually by late September, early October is when they hit that length, which is when they have the highest likelihood of survival. And that's when fish will go in the water. So we're going to stock 1,500. I think this first year we're going to actually stock 2,000. This is like the coolest thing. This video shows the slide that they use at the Toledo Zoo. Because the first year we did it, there were so many kids walking around with little buckets, standing right on the edge of the dock, and people panicking and grabbing hoods and stuff to keep them from falling in. This sturgeon slide is a great response to that, and it's super cool, and everybody gets a real kick out of this. So this fall we're going to start stocking on the Cuyahoga. I believe there will be a slide at least one location that we're stocking fish in. And the locations are going to be identified that provide the best likelihood of survival, but also good opportunities to engage the public in what we're doing. Evaluation as the stocking proceeds. We'll be evaluating the success of stocking using a couple of different methods. Every fish gets a pit tag, like I mentioned, that microchip. And so whenever a sturgeon is caught, whether it's in a commercial trap net or in an assessment survey that we're doing or one of our partners is doing, we can scan those fish to determine where they were stocked and look at growth rates and other things. There's also talk that when we get to the point, probably 10 years down the road, where we start thinking that the male sturgeon might start returning to the river, there are some pit tag arrays that we can put in the river. And essentially, if a sturgeon swims over it, it should record that fish was there. So there's some thought about doing that down the road. The Fish and Wildlife Service does some targeted surveys in Lake Erie looking for Lake Sturgeon. So that's another element. And I think eventually we'll probably be doing work in the Maumee and the Cuyahoga River, specifically looking for sturgeon returning. And then telemetry. We use acoustic telemetry to follow movements of a lot of fish, including lake sturgeon. So that'll probably be another way that we evaluate the success of the program. And then, of course, outreach is a big thing. We've been pretty quiet about this project right up until last fall, and when we announced that we'd be moving forward with this, and public outreach is a really great way for some of our partners to shine. As a division, I don't know that I can always communicate in a way that reaches the public like some of our partners do. Like, for example, if you've not seen the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District's spoof on the Madonna song, Like a Virgin, that's now Like a Sturgeon, you need to jump on their social media and see it. It's hilarious. And honestly, I think more people are talked about that video than about anything else that we posted on social media. It's awesome. So expect to see a bigger widespread announcement in June about kind of a save the date where we're going to be doing this stocking, and it'll be a great opportunity if you're interested to come to one of the public release events. So wrapping up, I want to just talk real quick about a pilot project we did last fall. So we did stock 60 Lake Sturgeon juveniles in the Cuyahoga River last fall in 3 different locations. They each had a acoustic transmitter implanted into them so that we could follow their movement and behavior. And ultimately, we wanted to do that to know if there were better locations in the river for stocking than others. Are there going to be places that retain fish for longer? Are there places where there's predation by both by fish and by birds? We have some herons that are active on parts of the river. So there were some concerns about that as well. We're trying to make sure that we are responsible with these fish. For you that might not be familiar with what telemetry is, we implant fish with a transmitter, and each transmitter has a unique code, a unique identifier. And every 2 to 5 minutes, that transmitter in the fish sends out a sound, a coded sound. Down at the bottom of the lake or in the bottom of the rivers, we've got these receivers down there that are just sitting there and listening and recording anytime that they hear a transmitter. So this is a walleye, but if the walleye swims within the cone of hearing of this transmitter and it sends out its signal, that fish and time is recorded on the receiver. The fish can then swim off, and then we come around and we pick that receiver up off the bottom. We can download the data and drop it back down. So last fall we had an initial stocking of sturgeon with transmitters in them. We stocked at 3 different locations. The downstream location was Merwinsworth Rivergate Park. That's a Cleveland Metro Park facility right near the mouth. We also stocked at Boston Mills, which is part of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and then at Cascade Valley, which is a Summit Metro Park that's fairly close to the dam. I don't want to dig too deep into these figures, but what we did learn was that the further you stock fish upstream, the longer they're retained. And it's actually a significant difference by several weeks. So it's not just, they don't just turn around and swim downstream. If you stock them in the appropriate habitat, they will stick around for a couple of weeks. And what we hope is happening is that they're imprinting on the river water, which will lead to them returning. We did not have any mortality that we're aware of, but of these fish. But of course, we don't have all of the data yet because we're still collecting receivers from the Cuyahoga River. And this will be ongoing. We'll be doing more tagging of these fish in future years. So kind of back to our reintroduction process. We've checked enough of the boxes. We know that there's existing population. We've addressed some of our concerns and constraints. We've put a plan together that's been approved by both the partners and the Lake Erie Committee. We have a goal of October 4th of 2025, we will be stocking at those 3 different locations on the Cuyahoga River. And then it'll be, in fact, in the next couple of weeks, the gametes will start to be collected in the St. Clair River. And you're going to hear more about this as time goes on and we get into June. So if you're interested, this QR code takes you to our division website, where there's more information on Lake Sturgeon and the specific Cuyahoga National, or the Cuyahoga River Reintroduction Plan. The Maumee River Plan is there too. So good information there if you're interested in it. And with that, I think I still have a few minutes for questions before I go over. So thank you. Yes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering about the range. You know, you mentioned, you know, several hundred in Lake Erie. We know that walleye, or I've heard that walleye kind of range all over. Do they kind of stay in one spot, or they go all over Lake Erie?
Yeah. So the question was about sturgeon movement in Lake Erie, and there have been adult sturgeon tagged in both both ends, you know, the bookends of the lake, those populations. And while a lot of them, I would say probably the majority of those fish stay fairly close to the upper Niagara River, there are fish in those populations that are just great wanderers. They will just take off and lap Lake Erie in a summer just because. We don't know why, but they are capable of making large scale movements, and they do on occasion. But it's not the entire spawning stock that does that. So, yes.
Given that these fish mostly feed off of the bottom, I'm wondering if any of the long-term pollution sediments that are in the lake would impact the fish, and if that is going to be monitored.
I think eventually it would probably, I guess the question was about whether the potentially polluted sediments on the bottom of the lake would cause a problem with lake sturgeon, and whether they'll be monitored for that. I would say yes, in the long term, they probably will be, especially if populations recover to the point where we start considering a fishery.
But you have 50 years to work.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking, it'll be long after I'm retired that any of that, we start talking about any of that. I think it's less of a concern simply because, you know, the things that they're feeding on are young. I mean, they're talking about invertebrates and round gobies. They're not real old. They don't bioaccumulate a ton of stuff. And I don't know that anybody has come to us and been concerned about that as an issue. We do, as part of our regular survey work, we do send fish tissue samples to the Ohio Department of Health for contaminant sampling already. And so I would assume that down the road, when they become more abundant, they would be included in that as well. So, yes.
What else that there's similar fisheries in Wisconsin that have similar systems and issues with pollution, different stuff, but long-lived current sturgeon populations that we would be able to find analogous. But I think everything you just said.
Yep. Yeah, and there's lots of fish that are currently in the Detroit River, which was as bad as anything that Lake Erie got historically. So, yeah. Yep. Yep.
But
Yeah.
but they do just
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, we have some evidence recently that suggests that Lake Erie freshwater drum can live 35, 40 years, and some of the buffalo that we have are pretty long lived too. So there will be opportunities to look at that. So yeah, great question. Yes.
You had mentioned that they feed on invasive species. What other benefits do the lake sturgeon specifically have?
So, you know, the question I get a lot is, oh, okay, why should I care? You know, why should I care about lake sturgeon? And that is a hard question to answer because the value of a species is really up to the individual. Environmentally, there's a lot of research that suggests that if a ecosystem is capable of sustaining kind of the charismatic megafauna. So you think about like elephants in Africa, or tigers in Indonesia. If the habitat can sustain those charismatic megafauna, it benefits all of the other species that are supposed to be there as well. And Lake Sturgeon have been kind of tapped as one of those as well. If the habitat is of sufficient quality to sustain sturgeon, then we know it benefits 20 or 30 other species as well. So it gives us a nice indicator of habitat quality and cleanliness, water quality. They do feed on. They feed on prey items that you would typically think of being more, for perch or smaller bodied fish. So there is some of that as well. There's a benefit to them. I don't think they're ever going to control round goby populations because there's just not enough of them, and that's not how predator-prey dynamics work. But there's a benefit there. They provide like cultural benefits. I know First Nations are very interested in Lake Sturgeon because of a historic, connection with them as a species. So they are very excited about sturgeon restoration work. And I mean, ultimately, if we look at if we look at the St. Clair River in Michigan, or some of the places in like the upper Great Lakes in Wisconsin, there are fisheries there where you can go out and harvest a fish of a certain size. So sturgeon are just fine to eat if you want to do that. And I don't think very many people do, especially in the St. Clair River or up in places in northern Michigan, but there is harvest in other areas. So there are some benefits there as well. I think mostly though, they're a native species that belong here. They're an indicator of good water quality and good habitat recovery. And so that's why there's value for me. So, but yeah, it's a great question. Great debate sometimes. Anything else? Yeah.
Water temperature have any effect on them? Because some species of fish do, some don't.
Yeah, they certainly are, I think, fit more in the category of like a cool water species, like walleye or smallmouth bass. They like kind of those moderate temperatures. There is a thermal max for them, but I don't know it's anything that we get to in Ohio. For like maybe the eggs or for larval fish, there are times where the Cuyahoga or the Maumee might get too warm for them, warmer than ideal. But there's also thermal refuge in a lot of those places. And frankly, when you're talking about these big fish, if it gets too warm in the river, they'll just go out into Lake Erie and find some water depth, and they're fine. So our concern for that would be more for the juveniles and for the larval fish than for adults. But and I don't remember what that number is, but I know the Maumee rarely exceeds that temperature that is threatening for juveniles, and I don't think the Cuyahoga ever does, but I'd have to double check that. Yeah. Well, that's just at the surface, right?
Yeah.
Anything else? I did not look to see if we have any questions on. Okay, even better. Even better. All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the first Friday in June, USGS, United States Geologic Survey, will be talking about Cisco.
Another native species with restoration aspirations. So,
Yes.
yeah, cool.
Yes. Round of refreshments. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week. There you go.